The Torah tells us, "V'yikach Yisro Chosid Mishpa, Moshe et Sipora, Eshes Moshe Achash Shiluchel." Yisro had taken, who was the farm of Moshe, as Sipora, the wife of Moshe, after she was sent away. So Rashi over here cites the Chazal, when was she sent away? When Hashem said to Moshe, return to Egypt, Moshe took his wife and his sons. Aaron went out towards him, and he met him in Har Elokim. Aaron asked Moshe, who are these people? This is my wife who I married in Midian. These are my sons. Aaron says, and where are you taking them to? Where are you going with them? Mitzrayim. He says, I'm going to Egypt with them. So Aaron says to Moshe, repaying for those who are there. Are you coming to bring more Jews into bondage, in a more Jews to be in a painful state? So when he heard this from Aaron, he said to her, return to your father's home. So she took her two sons and she returned. She went back to Midian. Now, let's understand. Moshe understood exactly what Egypt was all about. He understood what it was about. So if he understood what it was about, even though he hadn't been there for 60 years after he had fled, Hashem says, I heard the outcries of your brothers. You're going back to redeem them. You're going to perform miracles. And he explained to him what miracles he's going to perform to prove that he's God's agent. Throwing his staff to the ground, water to the ground, turning to blood, and putting his hand into his breast area, and he becomes a leper. These are the signs that he's God's agent. And they're going to be plagues. And he tells him, Paro is not going to heed your word until he sees my powerful hand, my outstretched arm. So Moshe understands what's going to happen in Egypt. There can be miracles that the world has never seen before. And the miracles, the value of the miracles are what? To expunge the idolatrous beliefs which the Jews were inculcated with during the bondage. That was the value of all this. So Moshe understood, although the Jews are in bondage, and not only that, what bondage are we speaking about? From the time the plague started, there was no longer physical bondage. The bondage ceased after the first plague. The whole story with the straw subsidy being withdrawn, that was a very short period of time. But immediately afterwards, once the Makos began, there were no longer plague. There were no physical bondage. Jews were no longer physically enslaved. It was just being in Egypt. So he felt, Moshe, even though Egypt may be this bastion of spiritual impurity, but being exposed to the hand of Hashem at this exceptional level, which the world has never seen before, what we call Nisim Gluyim, these revealed miracles, his children, his family would not be impacted negatively to the point where it's not worthwhile for them to see these miracles. That was Moshe's original understanding why, although Egypt being what it was, and he knew what it wasn't worthwhile going there. What Aaron held, he says, no, even though it may be that, but in terms of the upside is greater than the downside. As a result of that, he's going to Egypt with his wife and children. Aaron hears this. Aaron says, I disagree with you. I disagree. I'm there. I'm experiencing it. With the Levim, the Levim were not involved in the bondage. Were not. But just being in that environment will compromise them to a point where they may not be able to recover from that, regardless of what they see. As a result of that, Moshe appreciated what Aaron had said to him. He says, it's better send them back rather than take the chance or understand what the diminishment of Egypt is. And this is Ach Shlucher. This is the reason why Moshe sent back Tzipporah and his two sons back to Midian for that reason. But it's interesting. We find that on the way to Egypt, Going there, his son Eliezer wasn't circumcised. And the Torah tells us the whole story that he was nearly killed. The snake came and swallowed him from his feet to his waist and from his head down to his waist. And Zipporah understood that the reason why his life was in jeopardy was because of what? Was because he didn't circumcise Eliezer. Because he had delayed for a moment, he did not circumcise Eliezer. That's the reason why he was nearly killed. And Zipporah realized that it was due that the Milo was not, that mitzvah was not attended to, she circumcised him. Zipporah, that's the story we read in last week's reading, on his way to Egypt. Not last week, a while ago. Now, if Moshe would have understood what Aaron's telling him now, that whole incident of not circumcising his son wouldn't have come about. He would have circumcised him before he left Midian and left his family behind. Moshe, if you remember, he made a whole calculation. To circumcise immediately and began traveling, my son's going to be in jeopardy. And to delay beyond a certain point, I can't. Therefore, I have to do it now. Moshe Rabbeinu, the whole issue wouldn't have come up. See, his life was only in jeopardy because he misunderstood and didn't appreciate the full impact of what Egypt's all about. If he would have understood it, he would have never embarked on the trip with his family. And it says in Chazal that the only one who was qualified to take the Jews out of Egypt was only Moshe Rabbeinu. Because we said, remember, if you remember, because the Torah had to be given to Klal Yisrael. The only person who had the dimension of Klal Yisrael, because his neshama was the equivalent of all Klal Yisrael, was only Moshe Rabbeinu. If Moshe Rabbeinu would have been killed, due not to circumcising his son, there wouldn't have been a Kabbalah Torah. The world would have never met its objective of Bereshis Bar Elokim. It would have never happened. If that's the case, due to this misunderstanding of not appreciating of what Egypt was, which he only realized when Aaron shared it with him, all this would have never come about. I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, Hashem should have revealed to him immediately. Go to Egypt, leave your family behind. Hashem could have said to him, leave your family behind. Why put yourself in a position where you may be compromised, you may even be killed? But Hashem allowed that to happen. That he was in a position where he was nearly killed. Zipporah saved his life by circumcising the son. And then afterwards, he meets Aaron, and he says, Aaron tells me, better go back. Go back. I mean, you see, I mean, in terms of the way Hashem allows things to unfold, leaves things to Bechira. Even though Hashem could have prevented the whole story, they would have never come to that moment where Moshe Rabbeinu would have been actually compromised or put into jeopardy. If he would have shared with him, don't go to Egypt. Oh, you go to Egypt, leave your family behind, which ultimately he did, but it was only due because Aaron had told him. If not for that, he would have. Hashem could have solved the whole issue. Share with Moshe Rabbeinu. Egypt is this. You go because you're the Redeemer, or you will not be affected. Your family will be affected. Leave them home. Now, her two sons, the first name was Gershom. And the question is, what does he even have to identify them? But her two sons. I mean, where does it play such an important role that we have to know their names? Gershom and Eliezer, right? But the Torah makes it a point. Gershom. The first one's name was Gershom. Why? Because Moshe Rabbeinu said, I am a stranger in an alien land. That's why the first one was called Gershom. Eliezer. And the second one's name was Eliezer. The God of my father was there to assist me, and I was saved from the sword of Paro. So evidently, knowing who they were is important, to know who they were. Otherwise, Torah wouldn't reveal their names. And it gives us the understanding why the names were what they were. Gershom, I'm a stranger in an alien location land. Eliezer, if not for Elokeinu Be'ezri, I wouldn't have been saved from Cherev Paro, from Paro's sword. So Rashi cites in Chazal here that he merited miracles, that they wanted to decapitate him, his neck became like a pillar of marble. He wasn't able to. That's where the judge, they became blind, and he was able to flee from the court, so on and so forth. That's Eliezer. So the obvious question is, which, sequentially speaking, which took place first? Right? Right? Paro. Right? He was only able to flee from Egypt because he was safe from the sword of Paro. But yet he named the second child Eliezer, not the first. The first was Gera Yisberes Nochrio. I'm a stranger in what? In an alien location. Why did he name them based on his experience? In the order of the experience. I was Eliezer and then Gershon. But it's the other way. It's inverted. Why? When Dazaviram, they revealed, they informed him regarding killing the Egyptian, Bikesh Laragus Moshe, Naset Savarok, Kamut Shel Shayish. When the executioner wanted to decapitate him, his neck became like a pillar of marble. That's why it's Tzelein Mecheref Paro. Rashi citing the Chazal, the Medrash.
I mean, he has to be thankful for where he is right now. That's the first and foremost. I'm thankful that I'm here in this
He wouldn't be
land.
alive. He wouldn't be alive. He wouldn't
I
have made it to Midian.
Understood, but still, it's I'm here. This is where I am. Thank you, Hashem, for putting me in this land, and I'll figure it out. And after that, he looks back at his time and
Okay. I hope when you were in third grade, your teacher gave you a better answer than that.
No, she did not.
Okay. So the way I've always explained it, that Moshe understands, people acclimate themselves very quickly to their environment. And if you acclimate yourself for the sake of survival, automatically you become an object, you become influenced. Moshe understood, even though Midian was not Egypt, Midian was what? Was an idolatrous location. There was not a trace of anything representing what Moshe was about, what the Jews were supposed to be. Being there, you have to understand, this is not my place. I don't belong here. I will never belong here. I'm a stranger. It's alien. It has no relevance to me. Not for a moment. And the moment I'm able to leave, I'm leaving. As a result of that, he's able to what? To retain and maintain his status of spirituality. That's why that's first and foremost. The moment you compromise, or even mind-wise, somehow I'm going to work it out. It's not upset, I'm going to work it out. First thing is you have to put up literally this wall between you and your environment. I have no relevance to this environment. That's first and foremost. I will maintain myself to the utmost. If I have that, then we can talk about appreciating I was saved. But to go from the frying pan into the fire, what's the point? If I would have been killed in Egypt, or I would come here and I assimilate, and I'm not going to be who I'm supposed to be. Therefore, I have to first address who am I supposed to be. How do I do that? Now it has value that I was saved in Egypt. But now I'm able to go back when I'm supposed to go back to be who I'm supposed to be. That's how I explained it in the past.
Rabbi, I would say,
Find that when Yaakov fled to Choron, he asked Hashem Ushmorani,
protect him.
Morani, protect me from Gile Resh Virus Dom Avodah Zorah, from the three cardinal sins, and from Lashon Hara. And Hashem gave him the guarantee he will watch over him. I mean, he could have said, my mindset is, I don't belong here. Like Moshe said, Geri Yisberes Nochrio. Right? I'm a stranger in a land that's not mine. There's an alien location. I don't belong here. I don't identify. And as a result of that, I won't be subject to any levels of influence. You don't think in Midian there were similar types of behavior in society there? The three cardinal sins and Lashon Hara, they had the same thing. That wasn't unique to Choron. But yet Moshe, he said Ushmorani. He asked for special protection. Moshe didn't ask for special protection. He fled. He just says, my mindset is I don't belong here, therefore I'm able to deflect all the influences. What's the difference between Moshe and Yaakov? Yaakov is the father, the founding father of Klal Yisrael. He has 12 sons. If his spirituality is compromised as much as an iota, the effect, the ramification is what is eternal. Klal Yisrael is not going to be a Klal Yisrael. Therefore, he had to have that divine protection that literally it's as if he's not there, as if he's not in that location. He cannot take a chance under any circumstance to say, I am who I am, therefore. This is even after spending 14 years in Shem Ve'ever, learning the Torah to deal with all the issues of what? Of Chutz La'aretz, as we've explained. That's why he went to Shem Ve'ever. How to deal with all those issues. Still not enough. Shmorani. And we said, the name of the Orach Chaim HaKodesh, Hashem, it says Hashem Owen Olov, over there by the ladder, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, and he says, Inni Elokimi Modi. Nothing less than Midas Adin. He accepted upon himself that he has to be so perfect, and if he compromises himself as much as an iota, he's not going to be worthy of anything. He himself is setting the bar. Hashem set the bar much lower. He's setting the bar higher. Because Yaakov, knowing he's the Av of Klal Yisrael, he will be the father of the 12 tribes. He can't literally leave a moment where he's not fully focused on how he has to advance and behave. As a result of that, Ushmarani, Moshe Rabbeinu is not the founding father of Klal Yisrael. He's not. As a result of that, the level of of cognizance that he needs beyond that, he needs a special shmir. It's not. As long as I have the mindset is Gary Yisber Stachriya, that's sufficient. But that special shmorani, that was relevant to Yaakov, it has no relevance to Moshe. As I once said, we say that what should be the aspiration of every Jew? Yaakov. One of my achievements is going to be the equivalent of Avram Yitzchak Yaakov. It doesn't say one of my achievements can be as great as Moshe Rabbeinu. So if you remember what we explained was because every Jew, his spiritual DNA is Avram Yitzchak and Yaakov. Our spiritual DNA is not Moshe Rabbeinu. They are the DNA. Therefore, that DNA cannot be compromised as much as an iota. It has to be protected. That's Ushmarani. Moshe Rabbeinu is not the DNA of Klal Yisrael. As a result of that, all he has to have in mind, Geri Yisber Stachriyo. Understanding it is alien to me. I don't want to be here. I will not let my guard down. That's enough.
I mean, ultimately,
Yovel Yisro, Chosid Moshe, one of Yishto Moshe. Yisro, the father of Moshe, came with his sons and his wife to Moshe, Ela Midbar. Torah's making a point. Where did he go? You know, he didn't move from one location to another where the second location had relevance to the first location. He went into the desert. Asher hu choner shom, where that's where Moshe was residing. Har Elokim, by the mountain of God, is Har Sinai. Ela Midbar. So Rashi, take a look at Rashi. Av onu yodim sheb midbar. We know he was in the midbar. What's Torah telling you? He went into the desert. Elo b'shvocho shel Yisro diber hakosov. The Torah wants to speak about the praiseworthiness of Yisro. Shel Yoshe b'chodesh shel olam. He was the sheik of Midjan. Unedovo libo lotzis la midbar mokom tov. And his heart generously gave of itself, all desires in the heart. He compromised all that to go into a location of desolation. Lishmo dvar divrei Torah, to listen to words of Torah. He gave it all up for that. This is Shrocho Shel Yisro. To give it all up for that. You know, very often it shows a certain degree of humility. I mean, all that we want. That means you have to revere and value the Torah to such a degree that all the acknowledgement, all the goodwill that he has, that he established throughout his life, means nothing regarding this moment. That's what it is. You know, it's interesting. You know, there's a word from Rameir Simcha of Dvinsk. A Jew has an obligation to give his life in certain situations. And Jews do. You're willing to die, but yet when you're confronted with a certain situation and your feet are put to the fire, very often we fail. Does it make sense? Speaking Lashon Hara, we succumb to the temptation. Regarding other things, we succumb to temptation. But when it comes to giving your life, we've already made up in our minds, if we're ever confronted with that situation, willing to die. Al Kiddush Hashem. I mean, there's nothing more valuable than one's life. So yet we'll give up our life, but yet other things, when we're confronted with those tests, we fail. Doesn't make any sense. So how do you understand it? You know, when a person dies, it's a moment decision. Once the decision's over, it's finished. You're no longer alive. In terms of confronted with temptation continuously on an ongoing basis, it's not so simple. Dying is a one-moment event. Once it's over, it's over. You've made the decision, you go on to higher levels. Temptation, you tempted once, twice. It's ongoing. Every moment of every 24-hour period. The Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, is there to trip us up. It's not simple. It's easier to die in a moment because nothing follows that moment. That's Rameir Simcha. To give up his glory, a person works his whole life to establish status, identity, goodwill, and you give it up. And when you give it up, I mean, you can continue to live. But I value the Torah to such a degree, that is my claim to fame. That I have the privilege to be connected to Torah. What about the other? Everything else is meaningless. Meaningless. You know what this is? This is like Yisroel Shel Yisro. This is the praiseworthiness of Yisro. He had such a grasp of what Torah is, regardless of what anything is worth, he's given it up. Although it still exists, and he no longer has it. And he's no longer be acknowledged for that. Doesn't make a difference. Vayomer Moshe, Ani chosentcho Yisro bo elecho. I am your father Moshe, Yisro coming to see you. V'ishtcha, and your wife, u'shnei bonech imo. And your two sons with her. What is he telling them? So Rashi himself cites the Chazal. I'll be your father-in-law, and if you want to come out on my behalf, come out on my behalf. And if I'm not sufficiently worthy, come out on behalf of your wife. And if your wife is not sufficiently worthy, you should come out and greet us on behalf of your children. I mean, why would Moshe not come to greet Yisro for Yisro? Yisro just abandoned everything in the world to come to study Torah. Yisro ultimately, what's his name? He served every deity and he gave it all up. He gave it all up to accept monotheism. And his wife, it's his wife, his sons. The answer is not so simple. You know, everybody has different takeaways. Factually, Yisro was a leading representation of idolatry in the world. So Moshe now is going to give him a certain degree of acknowledgement. Everybody has different takeaways. Of course, he deserves it for himself. But whenever you make a decision, you have to take many things into account. How are people going to read the script? If they read the script wrong, and not the way it should be read, although he has this background, it must be maybe, and therefore they say it's not the end of the world. It's not the end of the world, although he was an idolater. You know, but if that's going to be a takeaway, it's a problem. Idolatry is not the most extreme. It's not the end of the world. It's forgivable. It's forgivable if you unfortunately failed. Hashem is willing to take you back if you did tshuva. So maybe Moshe Rabbeinu going and acknowledging him, greeting him, and it says in Chazal, that only two people in the history of the world actually experienced an honor at this level. Yaakov, when he came to Egypt, was when Yosef went out to acknowledge his father, who followed? The elders of Egypt, all the ministers. Millions of people went out to greet Yaakov. When Moshe Rabbeinu went out to greet Yisro, who went out? Moshe, when it goes out, Aaron, Bonov, Zekanim, Shishim Ribo. It's unheard of. This is the acknowledgement and the honor and the glory that Yisro experienced at the time. To be put on that level of pedestal with that kind of background, maybe it's the wrong thing. And Hashem says you go out and greet him. It's a Medrash Tanchuma. You go out and greet him. Moshe Rabbeinu was very hesitant. Exact was what I'm saying. And you know why? And I'll just end with this. How many times is idolatry mentioned in the Torah? 48 times. How many times does the Torah discuss ger, conversion? 48 times. Hashem says, this man who was an idolater, he abandoned by idolatry for my sake. If that's the case, make sure to go greet him. Show him the value. You have nothing to worry about. It's interesting, 48 versus 48. We have Memches Dvarim Shator Nixblim in Pirkei Avos, the 48 ways to acquire Torah. Because what is the antidote to even the most extreme level of sin? Torah. That is the antidote. So therefore it's Memches. If you have Memches Dvarim Shator Nixblim, then you're able to deal with every issue. Even the most extreme level of what? The failing, which would be idolatry. Be continued.
Wouldn't you say though